Lag BaOmer, but between Lag BaOmer and 3 days before Shavuos, they still don't make weddings. But there is a lot of, you can listen to music and you can take a haircut from then on. It's not just on Lag BaOmer you can take a haircut. You can take a haircut if you want to go to a barber or have your sister give you a haircut. If you get along, you got to make sure you don't have any arguments right before that. It's also the day, Lag BaOmer we know is the day that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, 24,000 Talmidim passed away, which is an incredible number. Now we take it into context of today's days. So this basically roughly, this is just in 33 days, 24,000. And the godless of Rabbi Akiva was, he started at the age of 40. He had 12,000 Talmidim first, and he came to visit his wife, and she was the daughter of Kalbasuwa Veshi. She left a very wealthy house to marry him. And as he got to the house, front of the house with his 12,000 Talmidim, he overheard a conversation going on in his house, which they were very, very poor because he didn't even have money for a bed. They used to take new straw every evening. So she came from wealth and she gave it all up for Torah. And yet the conversation went as such. The neighbor said, "Why did you leave all of what you had? You had wealth, you had status, you were, Kalbas was like the one of the cream of the crop of your Yerushalayim. And you gave it all up for this man who you haven't seen in such a long time, for 12 years. So she said to him, to her neighbor, if what he's doing is what I hear he's doing, and he's accomplishing in Torah, I wish he doesn't even come back for another 12 years. Imagine that. So for 24 years, he turned around promptly. He didn't even walk into the house. And he turned around promptly, and he went back and learned Torah. And the question was, why didn't he just go in to say hello? Or he got there, so, he went so far, he didn't come into the house. And the Rabbanan, whoever asked the question, seemed to say like this: when you're learning Torah and you pause, and if there's a pause, it's never the same. It's just never the same. So he knew that. So he knew if he goes in, things won't be the same. So he realized if she wants me to grow in Torah the way she wants, she will appreciate the fact that I went back and learned Torah, and obviously she did. All his Talmidim were killed, and he began, the godless of Rabbi Akiva was that he started all over with 5 Talmidim. And these 5 Talmidim were the Tanoim of the Gemara that began that, and interestingly enough, we don't know any names of the 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva, I once mentioned to a story, spoke on such a high level, which means they had a very high level in Torah. The problem was that they learned Torah without a heart. They learned Torah. They did it because they wanted to become Rabbanim. They did it because for side reasons which they should never have had. It should have been the Shema. And therefore, the people, when they reach a level of Torah to such a great extent that they knew how to learn, and they still didn't do it the right, proper way, they didn't recognize their friends and respect them. So the Bnei Shalom felt such people we don't want as Manhiga Klal Yisrael, and it's worthwhile to get rid of all that Torah that they learned, to start all over with 5 genuine Talmidei Chachamim who did it Lishma. And that's why we have one of the reasons why Lag BaOmer is so great. And I had a thought about this, is Lag BaOmer is 49 days, and the 32 days is up to now, and then we have another 17 days. So the gematria of these 2 words is Leiv Toiv. First is Leiv, and then it's Toiv. After the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva passed away, it started. Everything was from that on. Ain't Toiv el Torah. The Torah that was given after that was the highest form of Torah. And of course, the Reb Shimon bar Yochai, he passed away. Reb Shimon bar Yochai, this great Tana, Reb Shimon bar Yochai, who was one of the Talmidim here. His godless was, of course, besides his Torah, was that he was afraid that the Kabbalah will disappear because the virus was getting weaker, and therefore he wrote it all. He wrote it all down to save it. We should have it for the future. And what he wrote down was actually hidden for almost 1,000 years, and was given out by the Ariyah Kodesh and his students. So that is, and why we make our kiddush, we make a jump, and we have excitement on the day when somebody passes away, because we really, really believe that a person of that stature who was able to write down Kabbalah and Zohar to the extent that he knew certain levels of things that the average, forget about average person, but the average even Gadol B'Yisrael doesn't have that level. When he passes on, he just goes even to a higher sphere. If he goes to a higher sphere, it's actually a simple. For him, his body was pure. A pure body is already in Olam Haba while he's here, and it just continues on over there. So that's why we make simchas on the day that somebody passes away, which in a way doesn't really conform with what we think. Now we're going to go back into Avos. Avos, the first Perek we're holding Mishnahs. This Mishnahs is talking about another set of zugos. One was the Nasi, as I said, one was the Rosh Hashiva, and they were Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach. Kiblu mehem. They were makabel from the previous zugos. Now we had the Shimon ben Shatach before. We know that Shimon ben Shatach was the brother-in-law of Yanai HaMelech, who was a terrible king. And his wife, though Yanai's wife was Shlomchi, as we said, Shlomis. And this Shlomis protected all the Chacham as much as she can, as we said. And Shimon ben Shatach, his godless was also that at that time, as I said, that tzdukim were very, very powerful. People started to become more, I'll use the word modern, that's the phrase used today. They wanted to be more Greek philosophy and to do the things that the Greeks did. They do just basically olam hazeh. The body, Greek philosophy is that the body is great and everything that is physical. And what they did was the Sanhedrin was the Yanai packed the Sanhedrin with tzdukim. The people who didn't hold from the tzdukim didn't hold the Perek Shebiksav. They only held the Perek Shebapeh. So Perek Shebiksav explains Perek Shebapeh. If you don't hold from Perek Shebiksav, then you really can do almost anything you want, because the Perek Shebapeh is very unclear as it's written. So he went, Shimon ben Shatach went, and he cleared out all the tzdukim from the Beis Sanhedrin, and he put in what they called in those days the Perushim. The Perushim were the people, the holy Dolim of the time, who were deserving of being on the Sanhedrin. So that was Shimon ben Shatach. So Shimon ben Shatach, after Yana passed away, I told you that Yeshua Brachia was in Alexandria. Yehuda ben Tabai was also in Alexandria, Egypt, had gone away. That's how he got saved. And then he was one of them that came back, and he said, I need somebody to be on my side. And he said, I'm here alone. The Chachamim should come back to Eretz Yisrael, and they did. So Yehuda ben Tabai was in a time when there was a lot of strife and a lot of things that were going on in Klal Yisrael that weren't so good. So he said like this: Yehuda ben Tabai Omer, Al tas atzimcha ka'orche hadayonim. When you are a judge, when you have you're in a basement, you're judging people. Don't, when you approach the case, so to speak, and two people give you their side of the story, don't coach one of them. Don't be like a lawyer towards one of them and in effect help him along. You're supposed to, what should you do? When two people come in for judgment, for any case, they should be you should approach, in your eyes, how should you approach them? As if they were both guilty. Now, in a way, it's reverse of the way we think over here in courts over here. You're innocent until proven guilty. Over there, the Yehuda ben Tabai is saying that you don't take sides, and you have to be critical of both sides. In other words, the fact that they're, first of all, arguing is already a negative in a way, although many times things come up that don't necessarily be a bad thing, but because you have the din Torahs that they're not really necessarily fighting, they just want to know the actual halacha. But in fact, when they stand in front of you, you're supposed to treat them as if they were not, that one of them is selling a lie, both of them are saying something. They could say untruth, not that they want, they are. They could, it's a possibility, and that's how you have to approach each case. And Geshinif Tarim. However, when they are dismissed, which means when the case is over, in front of you, they should both be considered innocent. In other words, even if the two of them are arguing, and each one is very vociferous on his case, and he really feels 100% that he's 100% right, you are supposed to, when the case is over, and you maybe the guy who could have been so vociferous, he could have almost been a little bit of a lack of derech because he's so animated about his case. You should consider that when it's over, it's done with, and as if they were both innocent. However, the proviso is they have to accept the din right after they come out of a din Torah. They have to basically sign an agreement that they're going to abide. Well, actually, they sign it before they sit down. They're going to abide by the rules. And when they finish, if they abide by the rules, then they are considered zakoin, which means innocent, and that it should never and it could go back to whatever relationship should have been in the first place. There was in one of the cities in Europe, there was a big Talmud Chacham. His name was Moshe Zev. He was in the city of Brod. He was at that time, about 200 years ago, a big Talmud Chacham. He was the Rav, and people used to come to him about Dina, the Din Torah. There were two in that city. At that time, there were two very, very wealthy men who were partners in business, and both of them were big Talmidei Chachamim, and both of them were very, very good friends of this Rav. And something came up in business that they felt they should ask the Rav. Each one felt that he was right, and obviously had to do with a lot of money. And each one, they were arguing their case between each other, and they couldn't come to an agreement, so they decided to go to this Rav. So the Rav, he said that they used to have a courtroom sort of setting, so to speak. And the Rav, many times in the city, he was busy half a day with court. And so he already, he had a set time from 10 to 12, I'll be in court, and whoever has anything specific should come to court. And so what happened was he asks his assistant, is there anybody waiting outside so that we should go to court? So they said, oh yes, so we have one of them was a couple and the other one was a Moshe, both two cheshiva of the ear and the big parnas and big balei tzedakah. They literally funded most of the great things that were going on at that time. So he said, why are they here? So he said they came for Din Torah, or they came for Din Torah. Now he used to many times the rabbi who officiated or was the bezdin used to wear talis. Sometimes it was right after davening. He came to davening, but he used to wear the talis in during the Din Torah. So he comes and he puts this talis over his head, and in comes these two chashiv people who are both great friends of the Rebbe, of the Rav, and any time normally they used to walk in, they used to jump up, Shalom Aleichem, how you doing? And you, how you doing? And everything was always wonderful, and they had a great relationship. And this time he ignored them. And he says, so who is the plaintiff and who is the defendant? That's the first words that come out of his mouth. No Shalom Aleichem, no nothing. And he spoke in a very stern, tough voice. And they were both taken aback because they weren't used to that reception. They were used to being the character to the Rav. So one of them said, in a way, even though all night each one of the they were practicing what they were going to say and all that, they all of a sudden lost a little bit of their train of thought. So they all stumbled into whatever they wanted to say, and they went into their whatever they felt was their case. And the Rav thinks about it a few minutes, and he brings out, he asks for a sefer, he goes to a sefer, and he says, according to what we see in these two svarim, the halacha is so and so, and he points to one of them and he says, you're the one that is correct, and the other one is wrong, and he has to pay him. And then he looked, and then he asks, "Are you both going to agree to what I say as the din Torah?" So they both say, "Of course." So they said, "Of course." So he brings back the talus off his head, and he smiles and he says, "Shalom Aleichem, Reb Kappel, Shalom Aleichem, Reb Moshe, how are you feeling? How is everything?" All of a sudden, they're best of friends. So he was making a point. He was making a point to say, right now, the two of you are no different than two poor people coming in and asking for the din Torah. In fact, there's a halacha, interesting halacha. If a wealthy person comes to a din Torah, and the person that he's arguing against is a pauper, but has no money, and of course the wealthy person is walking in there with some beautiful suit, some beautiful kapata, whatever they used to wear, and the nebuch, the other one who comes in like a schlapper. The halach is before they enter the room, if it's the wealthy person has to either put on dress like the pauper, and if he's embarrassed about it, he has to buy the other guy's suit so that he should come to court representing himself in a way similar to the other person, so that there shouldn't be any waver in the mind of the judge that he should think, oh, this guy, if he is wealthy, he probably is more correct than the pauper, which it means absolutely nothing. The case is the case, and that's the way he has to judge it. So Shimon ben Shotach, in a time when there was so many problems, there were a lot of killings going on, there were a lot of different things. In fact, that at that time they abolished a lot of different halachas because they felt so much was going on that they didn't want to punish people, so many people. And so he says, Yehuda ben Tabai says, you have to make yourself as you are an impartial judge. And that makes sense. And each one of these people who come in front of you are both considered guilty until they prove that they are innocent. That's really the way the halacha is when it comes to judging. And the interesting thing about Yehuda ben Tabai was that because there were so many Perushim and so much going on, there was a case in front of him. There's a halacha. It's a very interesting halacha. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called hazama. Hazama means like this. Let's say I have a case where I say A and B are witness that C killed somebody. So they judge, they question the witnesses, and everything the witnesses said is correct. And the judgment for that person is that he should be killed on the say-so of A and B, of the witnesses. What happens if there are two more witnesses come after the first person was judged to be put to death, because they don't do it immediately. There is a little time in frame in case whatever. So a lot of people new witnesses. Two new witnesses come and say, how could to say about these two judges, about these two witnesses, you A and B claim that you were in New York at the time and you saw this person C kill somebody. It's impossible that you would happen to have been on those 2 days. We have on record that you were with us on vacation in the Galil in Eretz Yisrael. How were you on a tour with us? There's no physical way you could have been in New York at that time and that day. Wasn't a time that wasn't even part of the day that you could have come back and forth. We were on a weekly tour with you, and we know for a fact we saw you on that day in the Galil in Eretz Yisrael, not in New York. They're not saying that this C is not a murderer. It has nothing to do with the case. It has to do with the witnesses. So there's an interesting halacha that says that these witnesses actually get the punishment of what they wanted to do to the other one. That these two witnesses get killed. And therefore, these two witnesses are considered hazama, but they will mazim these eidim, and they get killed. Now you have to be mazim both those eidim. If you did it, one of you says only one of these two, only A was in the Galil and B was not in the Galil. That's not the case. Is not they don't kill the two eidim. He gets away with it, so to speak. Even though it's a false Avis, no question. A is lying. Maybe B is telling the truth, but A is lying. So therefore, we say that this case does not deserve a misa. What happened was such a case happened where only one of these two eidim were mazim, and this aid, the Shimon, but when Shimon Yehuda ben Tabai, this case happened in front of him when he was the judge, but he wanted to make an example of the Perushim, of the Tzedukim. So what he said was, and I hope you're following me, that I know it's not the halacha, but I feel if I make an example, because these two witnesses were both tzedukkim, if I make an example of these tzedukkim, people will not do this again. And he had this witness killed. One, only one, which is against halacha. It's against the Torah, actually. And because of that, he right after it was done, he obviously regretted it. It was an impulsive action. And therefore, for the rest of his life, he never judged another case. He punished himself. And he said, I can't believe I did it. I acted impulsively as a judge, and therefore I am definitely not going to judge another case for the rest of my life. Yeah. So, excuse me just one second. Okay. So now, this is Yehuda ben Tara. I don't know what time it is. Can you know what time it is? Okay. The two Mishnahs are very similar in a way. So I'm going to get into Shimon ben Shatach as well. Shimon ben Shatach is the next Mishnah, the Mishnah test. And he says also, he talks about witnesses and courts. Have a marba lachkar es ha'edem, ve'have zorbit v'decha, shema mitachim yom b'sheka. Shimon ben Shatach says, when you are interrogating witnesses, you make sure you do it extensively. Don't take your, something and one word out of what he's saying and judge on that thing. You must take now. There was a case by the Vilna Gaon that there was two people. There were false witnesses. They said about a woman that they saw her doing things that she shouldn't have been doing. And in that case, the halacha would have been that she would have to divorce her husband. And these two witnesses were false because somebody hired them because he had he was upset at something and he wanted to get back at the husband. So he hired these two witnesses, and they were excellent witnesses. They practiced, and everything they said was because the witnesses they don't, when they ask the questions, they're not in the same room. One comes in, says a witness, and then the other one comes in. And they warn them if you're saying lies and saying, everything is they scare you to try to say the truth, but these witnesses were professional witnesses apparently. Sure enough, the Rav had a feeling something was wrong with his witnesses, and he said, let's go to the Vilna Gaon. He went with these witnesses to the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon said, I don't want to hear the case, I want to hear the witness first. So he was, and he listens to the first witness, and then he listens to the second witness, and he stands up and he yells, false witnesses, false witnesses. Everything they said is false. And the Vilna Gaon was in those days. In Vilna, he was, everybody knew he was. You had to be careful. You didn't start up with the Vilna Gaon. So the witnesses right away confessed. And later they asked the Vilna Gaon, how did you know that these witnesses were false? Where the Rav says, I heard everything they said, and they repeated exactly to you what they said to me. He says, that's exactly the problem. He says two witnesses are questioned separately. Whatever they say has to be equal. But they can't be word for word. Word for word is not possible. Two people never say things word for word. They describe things differently. The content has to be the same, but the description always is slightly different. So he said, right, the fact that they were literally repeating each other, one word after the other, there's no question that they were false. And that's why when I knew if I stand up and I yell at them, they will be shook. And they will confess, and that's exactly what they did. He saved the situation. So Shimon ben Shatach says, make sure you interrogate the witness as well, and you should be very, very careful what you say when you say something towards them. Don't say anything that they'll be able to take anything out of the words you're saying. Listen carefully, interrogate carefully. Don't question in a way. Did you see if he was driving a blue car? Don't question like that, because then you're already putting words in his mouth. Because sometimes they're going to learn how to lie from what you guide them to. When you ask a question, you see that happening a lot in Congress when they ask all these witnesses questions. So the witnesses are being manipulated into saying something that they really don't want to say because they are saying things that the other person wants to hear. So that's what Shimon ben Shatach is very, very careful about. Now, Shimon ben Shatach, as I said, was the brother-in-law of the king, of Yana Hamelech. And Shimon ben Shotach, I'm going to just finish with this. I hope it takes a few minutes. When he became the Rosh Hashiva, there were 80 women who were sorcerers hiding in a cave, and these women were making a lot of trouble. They were, first of all, you're not allowed to do sorcery. It's against the Perek. It's a crime of Misa. And it's like what you're doing is you're effectively nullifying the power of Hashem by this. And how Hashem gives them that power is another question, which we can get into another time. In any case, what he did was, he was the Rosh Hashiva. He took 80 Bachim from his yeshiva, the big yeshiva, took 80 Bachim who were both very, very strong and very, very tall. And these sorcerers used to hide in a cave. And they hid in a cave, and they hid in a cave, and when he came to the cave, and he told them to put clean white clothes in a clay pot and seal it. He went on a rainy day, and he said, "Follow me. I'm going to whistle. When I whistle once, you put on the clothing right outside the cave. When I whistle twice, come into the cave." He goes himself into the cave, and they say, "What are you doing here?" He says, "I'm one of you. I'm also a sorcerer." So they said, "Prove it." So he says, "It's pouring outside, right?" She said, "Yes. I'm going to whistle. And when I whistle, and I'm going to whistle again, 80 beautiful young boys are going to come in, and you're going to be able to enjoy yourself with them." He says, "Oh, wow, this is an unbelievable sorcerer." So sure enough, he whistles once, and they put on their clothing. He waits a few minutes, and then he whistles again, and they all come in, and they all run towards, and they all pick one of these sorcerers, and they pick her up, each one, and they put it on her shoulder, put her on his shoulder, because the rule of sorcery was that if the feet are not on the ground, the power of sorcery is only when the feet are touching the ground. So by picking them up, they didn't have any more power. So he went and he brought them down to Beis-Din, and he had them judged, and they judged for Misa. What happened was the family of these sorcerers was very upset. Here, these women were all killed. They were whatever, they were wives and mothers, but they did something against her and against Hashem. So they went and hired witnesses to say that Shimon ben Shotach's son did something that was also Chayiv Misa, did something against the Torah that would be in judgment of Misa. And they were also very good witnesses. And Shimon ben Shotach's son was judged to be killed. And Shimon ben Shotach watched his son, who he knew was false. Now listen to this. As he was being led out to be killed, Shimon ben Shotach said like this, his son said, "If what they say is true, then usually what they say is Misa is mechaper. When you get killed, why do you kill him? So that it's a kapara on what the sin that you did. I don't want my Misa to be mechaper. For the rest of my life, I want to be in Gehenna for what they say I did. But if what they say is untrue, I want my Misa to be mechaper." And he insinuated that they should be punished. So they got very scared, and they right away recanted. The Eidim recanted. But the halacha is kivin shehiged ein choizer magid. The halacha is we don't take a witness that says something. Once the final judgment, the actual witness cannot recant his testimony, and the person gets killed. And many times we have witnesses. Second witnesses come, and second witnesses can say the person who said something was wrong. But these witnesses cannot recant their own judgment. And he watched his son get killed, and in a way he had the power as the Rosh Hashiva and brother-in-law of the king to stop this Misa. But halacha was halacha, and this affected him obviously for the rest of his life. So he says, "Have Mar Balachta say, you make sure those Eidim, whatever they're doing," he said, it came from pain. This halacha. Have Mar Balachta say them. You should interrogate the witnesses extensively. Be very careful. So we hope, Hashem, again, for learning the Torah, that we should be zoicha, that everybody who needs the Yeshua and Refuah and Shidduchim and anything that Klal Yisrael needs should come from doing the Torah. And have a very, very good day. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Amen. Thank you.